everyone. My name is Anita, and I'm here to introduce our guest speaker and want to share a little bit of information. I met Bruce about 5 years ago when he was just returning, and he said to me, when I get off this probation, I'm going to travel. I'm just going to take off. I want to go everywhere. But where do I go? How do I know what's going on in all these different states? How do I know about these restrictions? Well, he knew that there was a matrix out there on the Atwo website that kind of kicked everything off. And he used that sort of as a basis. Well, who's updating this? I don't know. Well, how do I know about this? Well, where do I get this information? I don't know, Bruce, but you'll figure it out. And he did. So week after month, whatever, we would meet, and he would show me a little bit more about what he did and a little bit more progress. And he said, you know, there should be somebody out there documenting their travel. And I said, that's a great idea, Bruce. So you just volunteered to do it. And our travel blogger was born. So when he got off, by the time he got off probation, he was ready. He was ready to take off. He had gone through all the states. He knew where he was going to go. He knew the requirements, and off he went. And the blog site that he created that he'll be sharing with you today, again, is his experience, but it's a heck of a good start for those who want to take off and travel. I get told all the time, as the chair of the membership committee for FAC, I get told all the time, they won't let me go. They won't let me go see my grandchildren. They won't let me go to my niece's wedding. They won't let me go. I said, who's stopping you? Okay? The only thing that's stopping you is not understanding what you need to do, what steps you need to take to get there. But nobody's stopping you. And Bruce is living proof of that. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Bruce Hossfield.
Yes, I am Bruce Hossfield, also known as Atwo Zee registered traveler. I'm going to be speaking only about domestic travel today, not international travel. If you're interested in international travel, there's a website for you called RTAG, RTAG, and you should look there. But one thing I know about my presentation, having given it a few times, is that the best way for me to do it is to just dive in and zoom through it as fast as possible, because if I get myself sidetracked, then there won't be any time left for questions. And I want to make sure there's time left for questions, so off we go. So as Anita said, I'm just a guy who wanted to travel. That's who I am. And so I had to research what the rules were in every state, not for the people in those states, but for people traveling from other states who are on registries in other states. Where did I get this information? As Anita said, AXOL, the Association for Association for Constitutional Sex Offender Registries, has a chart, but it dates from 2017. They have a chart on their website, so it's old, so I needed to update it. I researched all state statutes. I read every NARSOL digest cover to cover, especially those state sections that are in towards the back, and I look for stuff that might be needed to update my information. And Zoom meetings and call-ins, I participate in all of them. I have a website called Atwo Zee Registered Traveler. I have a table out there in the lobby. I have business cards to help you get there. And on my website, there is a chart. And it is a chart, a 50-state and 5 territory chart for all the things that you need to know, or most of what you need to know to travel. It's got statutory references. It's got registration triggers and guidelines, and it's got residency, presence restrictions. In other words, when you go to a state, what you need to know is the number of days that you can be there without triggering an obligation to register, right? And you need to know whether you're going to get wound up in any kind of presence or residency restrictions while you're traveling to that state. Additional comments? I give every state a rating. Like, there's Minnesota, Mississippi, and Missouri. Missouri rating, 4 thumb screws. Okay. Other things. Know the laws that apply to you. The laws of your state, in other words, the state where you are registered, is going to have laws relating to what you have to report to the local sheriff's department or equivalent when you are traveling out of state. You'll need to tell them you're leaving. You need to tell them how long you're going to be gone, what day you're leaving, what day you're coming back, where you're going. You're going to provide that information. And then the laws of the states you're traveling to pertaining to out-of-state registries, as I said before, especially the number of days you can be in the state and presence and residence restrictions. And by the way, a couple things. All the information on my chart is geared towards Tier 1 or equivalent registries. You know what you did, you know why you're on the registry, and so when somebody says to you, even if you're in a state where you don't have tiers, you can think and say, okay, would my offense be Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 in a state? Most people's offenses, including my own, would be Tier 1 in most states. Okay? So, I'm appealing to the masses here. All right? Also, this assumes that the most recent version of that state law is going to apply to you when you arrive. Okay? I know some of you have, well, my offense was 20 years ago, and therefore I've been grandfathered into a bunch of stuff that I don't have to follow in my state. Well, just to be on the safe side, you should always assume that everything is going to apply to you, even the most recent stuff, and you're not grandfathered into anything when you go to that state. If you are Tier 2 or 3 or equivalent, or have an older conviction, you may need to do some additional research. Now, first thing is, never try to fly under the radar. And as recently as this morning, I have had people tell me, oh, well, you know, I just travel. Right? I don't notify my sheriff's department when I'm leaving. I just go. I've never gotten in trouble. And my answer to that is, okay, so you got lucky. But just because you haven't been caught so far doesn't mean you'll never get caught. So my advice to you is follow the rules. Always notify your local law enforcement of your intention to travel and provide as much detail as you have. They're usually quite happy with that level of detail. I know where I'm going to be. I'm going to be traveling through X, Y, and Z states. But I don't know where I'm going to be camping that night or what motel, because I'm just passing through. But I have a destination. My destination is the Grand Canyon. Well, there you give it. And you tell them what days you're going to be there, they're going to be happy. It helps to have at least one specific destination for your trip. Like I said, never assume that you can travel without anyone finding out, because that's a bad assumption. It may be true 90% of the time, and then it's not true after that. And you don't want to wind up being arrested for a registry violation and going to jail. Never stay in any state or location long enough to trigger a registry, a requirement to register. And what I put here is, again, the same 3 states from my chart that's on my website. Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri. And what I have there is, under registration triggers, you see that in each case it says, visitors, Minnesota. Sorry, I should be closer to the microphone. 5 days for initial registration and updates. Mississippi, temporary residents defined this way and that way. Missouri, blah, blah, blah. So you can go to the chart and you can find out how many days you can be there. Well, I traveled through Missouri on my way here from Iowa on this trip. I stopped and I saw George Washington Carver's birthplace, which is a national monument. And it was interesting. And just so happened that I stopped there on Juneteenth. So how appropriate. But you keep that all in mind. You need to know that kind of information. Document all your movements. Now, this is something that people say to me all the time. I shouldn't have to do this. It's wrong. It's so wrong. I'm not going to do it because it violates my constitutional rights. Well, okay, I'm there. I get it. I agree with you. But in the state of Iowa, when I travel from Iowa, they actually, the local sheriff's department in Johnson County, unlike I understand other counties in Iowa, but they want me to keep a registry. This is the sheet that I have for my Florida trip in 2022. Odometer readings, places I stopped, everything like that. And then I hand it back to them when I get back. I put a copy, I give it to them, and then they enter it in their computer. So they know where I went, but only after I went, which is crazy, but it keeps them happy. It's what they asked for, and I give it to them. And when you document your movements, then, although it's not right, they should not have any right to demand you to prove anything. But we all know that's not the way it all goes all the time. So keep that document. Receipts, right? You walk in, you get a drink refill at a Casey's store. And then they say, you want the receipt? Yes. And you keep it all in your car. So you can document where you were at any time, so if any eager beaver sheriff's deputy pulls you over for having a blown taillight, you got all the proof you need. Even though you shouldn't have to have it, and I agree with that, you've got it. Okay. Warning. The rules change, but don't go away. If you are a former or long-term registrant, like you've been either you're fortunate enough that you were able to get off the registry in whatever state you're living in, okay? Or you've been on the registry for 20 years and you should be grandfathered into something or this or that and the other. Actually, the rules do change depending on how long you've been on the registry or if you're off, but they don't go away. And so a lot of people think, oh, I'm off the registry. I'm free to go. I can go. Well, I'm applying to get off the registry in Iowa right now, and it may take me a couple of years to make that happen. But when I am free to go in Iowa. But as soon as I cross the state line, all right, then most states have their laws written so that it says not if you are on the registry in another state, you must register with us. No, their laws are written so, most states. So it says, if you ever committed an offense that would be registerable in our state, then you must register if you are here for too much time. So just being off the registry doesn't help you in most states if you travel. So you need to keep all this stuff on your, on you at all times. I travel with my chart. I cross the state line, I stop at the visitor center to pick up brochures and stuff, and I look at my chart to see, well, okay, what rules are here? And that will be for the rest of my life. All right, so I have a second chart on my website, which you may see if you find yourself in a position of being a former or long-term registrant. And that is a chart that deals specifically with that issue, which I created because one thing is clear. There's going to be more and more former and long-term registrants as time goes on in this country. And I've divided all the states in the United States into 5 categories as far as how they treat former or long-term registrants. Okay, so first is those states that I mentioned a minute ago that say, if you're registered in another state, then you must register with us. Because although the law doesn't say it, the converse must be true. If a state has that law, then if you're not registered in any other state, then you would not have to register with them. And there are 10 states that do that. All the rest are different, but there are 10 states out there which, if you're no longer on the registry, just go there. Second, out-of-state Tier 1 or equivalent registration requirements ends at a specified number of years. Some of you may live in states that are like that. If you're Tier 1, you're on a registry. There's just a guy pounding away at me out in a lobby saying, no, I have to be on North Carolina's registry for 10 years. Okay, but then he gets off. All right. So some states, like North Carolina is one of them, says you have to be on the registry for X number of years, and that applies to somebody who comes to their state. All right. So what does that mean? What that means is, if you have been on the registry for more than X number of years in your own home state, and North Carolina or North Dakota's rules say that if you were registered in their state, then now you don't have to be registered anymore after X number of years, you can go there after X number of years, right? So, but and you could stay there and not be triggering a registry obligation. But I would certainly, if I found myself in that situation, call the registry office, pose that question to them, and get them to send you a written response saying, yeah, that's right, you don't have to register here. But there are 16 states that do that. Now you have 10 plus 16, you're talking about 26 states here. Third category, out-of-state Tier 1 or equivalent registration requirement ends at a specific number of years from release of prison, usually, or at the number of years required by the offender's state of offense, whichever is longer. So being from Florida, where it's lifetime, that means any of these 7 states, including, by the way, Iowa, I come from out of state, and they will say, well, which registry requires you to be on on longer? Oh, it's Florida. It's lifetime. Therefore, even though you committed, Mr. Hossfield, even though you committed an offense, which if you committed it in Iowa, it would be 10 years, and then you'd be off. But just because you did not commit any offense in Iowa, now you're on for lifetime. States to be careful about. And then there's states that say Tier 1 or equivalent offenders, including out of state, allows them to petition for removal after a specific number of years, after establishing registry. Or 15 states say specific number of years after you leave prison. And then there's 3 states that say, oh, it's X number of years, say 15 years, but it's after you move to our state. Oh, that's a whole different story. So, but what happens in those states is, and Georgia's one of those states, that you can come, you go in there, if you have X amount of time since you left prison, you can move to that state, and then you can apply to get off. All right? Now, there are no guarantees on that, but they give you the option to apply. And then there's states, lifetime registry applies to all out-of-state registrants. And the state that I like to give as an example of that is Illinois. Because in Illinois, and if you go to their frequently asked questions registry page, it says right there, anybody who moves to Illinois from out of state is, no matter what your offense is automatically considered to be a sexually violent predator, which is lifetime. So, sorry about that. Don't move to Illinois. If you are fortunate enough to be gotten off your registry in some other state, just don't go to Illinois. Well, and there's how many states does it say? 4 states that do that. It's on my chart, and it's all in red text. You notice that I've been going, these states are coded in red text, right? These states are coded in orange text. These states, this is the ones that allow you to petition. These states are coded in orange text in column 4 of my chart. That's what it says. You have to go to my website to find that. The easiest way to find my website is to go to your favorite browser and just enter the words Atwo Zee. In other words, ATWO, A2, space, ZEE. It's going to bring up my website right on the top. And then go. Always go use a laptop or computer. Never use a phone or tablet. Why? Because for some idiotic reason I don't understand, it doesn't take you to your main page, to my main page, if you use a phone or tablet. It takes you to my main page where these charts are only if you use a laptop or computer. Okay. Here's a picture of the same 3 states, the same chart, showing column 4 of my former and long-term registrant chart, showing the same information that I showed you in the previous chart. Okay, so what you see is Minnesota, oops, the text is in blue. What does that mean? It means it's a whichever is greater state. Okay. Mississippi, yeah, for all that it's the deep south state and blah, 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 they allow you to apply. The text is in orange. And oh, by the way, the text that's there in column 4 of this particular chart is the actual text in the state law governing this. It's not a summary. It's not my opinion. It's the text. So you read it and decide if you think that I'm right about what it says. Missouri is a green state, all right? Which means if you're no longer on the registry in the state where you offended, and that's the state that's important, then you don't have to register it. You can go to Missouri, have fun. But it doesn't help me at all, because if you're no longer registered, is never going to happen to me, because I'm in Florida. I'm registered in Florida. My offense was in Florida, and I'm lifetime. So that green is helpful for some people, but not for me. Now, I want to talk about too paranoid or not paranoid enough. Because this comes up. one of the reasons why, Anita mentioned is that we get a lot of questions and calls from people who say, I can't travel. No one will let me travel. Okay, well, that's a case of too paranoid. All right? So let's talk about being too paranoid or not paranoid enough. Let's start with not paranoid enough. Okay? Reasons I have heard for not following the rules. Travel, first of all, first bullet point. Travel restrictions are an unconstitutional restriction on my right to travel, so I refuse to follow them. Well, actually, I agree with that, but except for the part where I refuse to follow them part, because it can be as unconstitutional as I agree that it is, and they're still going to enforce it on you until somebody takes it to court and gets it overturned. Meanwhile, you got to follow the rules, otherwise some eager beaver sheriff's deputy is going to pull you over in Idaho, look you up, call your state and your sheriff's department and say, you all know this sex offender is here? And the answer is going to be no. And we think that's a registry violation. Arrest that guy. I don't want to spend my vacation that way. Next bullet point. I have never been pulled over by the cops for a traffic violation in my entire life. So why should I worry about it now? Answer, because you're on the registry, dude. Next bullet point. Gee whiz, I didn't know I was supposed to report travel at my local sheriff. I just went on my trips and nothing ever happened. Well, now that you know, start following the rules. Last bullet point. I have been told my state or county doesn't require me to report travel. And by the way, Texas is one of the states where people tell me this. And as recently as last night, I was sitting at my table out there, and a guy from Texas, and we were talking and chatting, and he said, yeah, I travel, and my sheriff's deputy, the one that comes to your house and talks to you, he's like, oh, you should have reported that. But it's no problem. All right, fine. And that, but that does not going to help you when you get pulled over for a traffic violation in a different state that has a different set of rules. Because they will have expected you to report your travel from Texas. That's what they're expecting. And if anything else happens, and they call up your registry office in Texas, and they say, did this guy report his travel? The answer is going to be no. And then you're in trouble. So always do it. It ain't going to kill you. It's an imposition. I get that part more than anybody else. It's an imposition. I don't like it. But it's not going to kill you to report your travel. Whereas it might kill you to not report your travel. Too paranoid. Reasons I have heard for excessive paranoia. I heard that some hotel chains have a policy of not allowing registered people at their establishments, and some states and localities require hotels to notify all other guests of the presence of any registered person at their establishment. All right, well, is there anybody in this room who has ever checked into a hotel and had them check to see if you're on the registry? Yes? That actually happened to you? Because I was just getting ready to say, it never happens. Arizona. All right, well, sorry. Go to a different hotel or motel. Motels, I tell you, it's Motel 6, Super 8, they don't ask. They just give you a room. And most hotels are like that. Just go to a different hotel. So that's not a reason. It's just not a reason to be too paranoid. Okay, before traveling, you should obsessively research the regulations of your proposed destination or consult an attorney in that destination. And for anybody who's ever listened to the monthly Axol Zoom meetings that they have, Janice Bellucci says this a lot. And with great respect to Janice Vellucci, who I agree with, who I admire greatly, she's wrong. And she says this because she's an attorney. And an attorney is going to tell you to be excessively cautious. That's their job. So there's attorneys, and then there's reality. And the reality is that you don't have to know everything. Because in the vast majority of the situations that you're going to come across as you're traveling across this great land of ours and seeing the great sights and visiting the great cities and the national parks that are beautiful, people don't know who you are. They don't know who you are. And localities that put all kinds of, horrible restrictions on their registrants. Well, they're doing that to deal with some imagined problem of their own people. They don't care about somebody who's just passing through, and so you don't need to be obsessively worried about that. Okay. I am so scared of inadvertently tripping over all these rules that I just never travel at all. As I say, I think that's just too much paranoia, because here's the truth. If you follow the advice I've given you and report your travel to your hometown sheriff's department before leaving and stick pretty close to the itinerary you gave them and keep a travel log and hang on to all your receipts to prove your whereabouts, you're probably okay. So that's the way it is. And that's the rules that I've been traveling by. So that finishes my presentation, and look, it only took a half an hour. We've got how much time left? Hey, I can take all kinds of questions. So walk up to a microphone and ask your question. Or is there anybody who's like taking questions from online? All right, if any come up, yes.
I have a couple of questions, actually,
Sure.
if I may. The first one is, have you encountered any rules that are different in Native American tribal land than in the state that they're in?
That is a really interesting question, because last fall from Iowa, I went on a Dakotas tour. And that was really interesting because, as you may be aware, there's a lot of Lakota and Dakota tribes with reservations in those states. And I made it a point to, I think I'm going to go on a reservation tour and see what it's like. Yes, some of them have different rules. In those cases, though, I would give the advice of not being too paranoid about it, because they are similar in their nature to the local rules that like a municipality might have. They're aimed at reservation residents, and they're really not paying attention as you're traveling through. Another thing is, if they had a rule that said you couldn't be in a park, it really wouldn't be relevant to you, because I don't know if any of you here have been to reservations. Very few of them have parks. They're just people trying to go about their daily lives, and they don't have that kind of stuff. Most tribes, if they have like a museum or cultural center, they don't have it on their reservation. It's like, actually, leave us alone. You've done enough to us. We don't want you. You're not invited into our culture. We put the cultural center out there right next to the interstate highway for a reason. Go there. But so you don't need to be worried about that kind of stuff. And if it's a residency thing that you would be concerned about, you're probably just passing through anyway. There's no hotels, very few hotels and stuff on reservations. So if you're going to be in campgrounds, well, there are some campgrounds on reservations. But you can always go somewhere else if you're worried about that, to stay the night.
The other question is about tiers other than tier 1. I don't know if you're aware, but 3/4 of the people on the registry in Michigan are tier 3.
Yes.
And so are you aware that the rules are very different for higher tiers?
That's the reason why I pointed out at the beginning of the presentation that these rules are geared at tier 1, is because tier 2 and tier 3 may have different rules that apply. And if I may be permitted to opine about the tier system, now that I live in Iowa, a state like Michigan that has a tier system, the problem of punitive up-tiering is a real problem. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I'm in the process of getting off the registry in North Carolina, and my brilliant attorney looked into some things and found that I was on the registry in Illinois, our favorite state here. So my question is, I went to Illinois frequently because I was in the process of selling my parents' home, and I made intermittent trips there. I don't know how I landed up on that registry in Illinois, but the attorney told me that he doesn't handle that state. I was asking you if you have any knowledge of how this could possibly happen to me.
Well, I'm the travel expert. I'm not the how you ended up on Illinois' registry expert, but it's a problem. If you're on the registry in Illinois, you're going to have to go through some attorney in Illinois to get yourself off. It is one interesting thing about Illinois is that as a visitor, they put you on lifetime if you get tied up in it. But there is a process, if you're only visiting, there is a process that you can go through to get yourself off of their public registry when you leave. It's a convoluted process. You should speak to an attorney about it, but it is possible to do. And you should always find an attorney from Illinois. There must be some people from Illinois here. Ask them to refer you to an attorney in Illinois.
Okay.
Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. You mentioned that some of the states have laws that are concerned with your registrant status in other states, and some are concerned with if you have ever committed an offense that would be registerable in our state. There are some cases I know of where the state in which you committed the offense might not consider the offense registerable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that other states are that way. And do you know if there are any resources on identifying these particular cases and what you might have to do as far as travel restrictions, even if you're not on the registry, but you might be traveling to a state where they might require you to register?
Well, the first part of your question, am I aware of any resources to figure that out?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No.
Second part of your question is, if you're fortunate enough, and I addressed this in the presentation, so I'm just going to repeat myself now for emphasis. If you are fortunate enough to have been taken off of the registry in your state, or if you committed an offense that is not registerable in your state, but is registerable in other states, you need to be concerned about that. You would need to follow the rules in traveling as if those rules applied to you. That would be the conservative way to do it. That would be the way to handle things. And I'm assuming you wouldn't be asking that question unless this was you. So my advice to you is get the chart off my website, and if you're traveling to another state besides whatever state you're in, you just need to sort of, unless you have a good reason to know that it wouldn't apply to you in a particular state, having done the research yourself, for example, then you would have to just assume that all this stuff applies to you when you travel out of state. Here's an interesting, my story in Iowa, right? And if you come to these conferences before, you know that people tell you, don't go state shopping, right? Don't, because you're going to get screwed, okay? I chose Iowa as a summer home because it's in the middle of the country. Florida is not. Right? I want to travel. Florida is not very conveniently located for that, driving across the country. Iowa, excellent. But also I looked at the rules and it seemed to be pretty good for me. And I bought a house. The house had tenants in it. I couldn't move in until the tenants were gone. Their lease was up. Wouldn't you know it? Between the time that I bought the house and the time I actually came to reside in the state of Iowa copied Minnesota's rules and became a whichever is greater state. They had previously been a 10-year state for me. And then automatically getting off. But no. And you may ask the question, why did they do that? And they did that, my attorney tells me, and others have told me, because there were people who had offenses in Wisconsin which were registerable in Wisconsin, but not registerable in Iowa. And so there was this tiny little group of people, a flea on the back of the state of Iowa, moving from Wisconsin into Iowa in order to not be registered. And so in order to swat this little flea, and you know, the question is, if it's not a registerable offense in your state, why do you care? But no, they care. And so to swat this flea, they used a sledgehammer. That's the situation you're in.
Well, thank you for giving me so much encouragement.
Thank you for your presentation. This is coming from the live stream. And the question, or the statement question is, he is indicating that even if my state doesn't require notifying law enforcement of being away from the state unless it's 7 nights or more, that we should still notify them. I have assumed that as long as we weren't gone for more than 7 nights, that no notification was needed. And should a travel log with receipts be maintained even if it is a shorter trip of only a few days for our own purposes, but not provided to anyone?
Right. Again, let me give you my case in Iowa. Because in Iowa, the state law says something similar to what this person has asked. In the state of Iowa, you only have to report travel, according to their state law, you only have to report travel if it's travel for 5 or more days. So when I first moved to Iowa, it's like, this is great. I'm going to take a bunch of mini trips, right? I'm going to leave my house for 4 days. I'm not going to tell anybody. So, but it turned out my local sheriff's department had a policy. Remember I told you about the travel log? That only my county does that. Other counties in Iowa don't do that. Right? Well, my local sheriff's department has this other policy. They said, oh, no, that's not our policy. Our policy is that if you're leaving for more than 5 days, you have to come down here in person and report that. If you're leaving for less than 5 days, you still have to report that, but you can do that online. Thanks for nothing. So just because your state may have a law that says one thing, doesn't mean that your county sheriff's department or local registration office or whatever your equivalent is doesn't have some other kind of rule. And B, the problem still remains that when you go out of state, it's the state that you're actually in at the time where the sheriff's deputy is going to pull you over. And that's where you're going to have to explain things. And they may not be so understanding. So even if your state law is only saying 7 days or more, congratulations. I wouldn't mind doing that. I wouldn't worry about that if you were traveling in state, whatever state that is. But if you're traveling out of state, I'd still report it. In California, as I said before, I listened to all these Axel phone calls, and Janice Bellucci has said on any number of occasions that when you're traveling, if you're registered in California, still registered. If you're traveling within the state, you don't have to register that. You don't have to report that. Hey, I'll take her word for that. California's a pretty damn big state, isn't it? Right? So if you can travel within California, if you're registered in California and you can travel within California and not have to register that, fine. But if you're traveling outside of California, then you still need to report that. Next.
Sorry, baby's catching on this too. So in North Carolina, one of the laws is that you have to register any vehicle that you operate in person. How does that work for us flying in somewhere?
What state are you talking about?
North Carolina.
Sure.
But going out of state, if we rent a vehicle, we don't know what license plate.
If you report an if you fly someplace.
Yes.
And then you rent a vehicle there?
Yes. We have to report that vehicle. Do we need to report
As
that
soon as
vehicle
you
to
leave
North Carolina?
Carolina's airspace, they got no control over you.
Okay.
That's the answer.
All right. That's what I was wondering. Okay. Thank you.
Again, not to be, oppressively repetitive about it, but returning to my own experience, there came a time when I needed to move from Florida to Iowa. I needed to rent a U-Haul truck to put my furniture in. Okay? And sure enough, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, because I went in and asked them about that, do I need to register that U-Haul truck? Answer, yes. Within 48 hours of the time that you rent that vehicle, you need to come in here and register it. I said, but I'm just getting it, and then I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I'm here to report that I'm moving to Iowa. Do I still have to register the U-Haul truck? Yeah, you do. So what you need to do is you need to come in when you register that, when you rent the U-Haul truck, you load it up, you stop here on your way out of town, and you register the VIN number of the U-Haul truck. And then by the end of that same day, you're gone. What kind of sense does that make? But nevertheless, it's true. But if you fly out of your state, or the point is, once you leave the boundaries of your state, then they got no hold on you. What you're doing in the other state is the business of the other state. And if you're in that other state and you're not there long enough to have to register in the first place, then you certainly don't have to register the rental vehicle in that other state.
Are there states in which, you say you're traveling across the country, but you're not going to stay in that state, you're just traveling across it?
Just passing through.
Yes, so do you have to stop and tell someone that you're going through
No.
this state, that
No,
state?
that's never the situation in any state unless you stay there long enough to trigger an obligation to register.
Okay,
Let's use our favorite state, Illinois. Okay? The rule in Illinois is 3 days aggregate per calendar year, just like Florida. Okay? Aggregate, 3 days per calendar year. But those, in the case of Illinois, according to the Quincy, Illinois Police Department, which I went and asked this at, the counting rule doesn't start unless you stay overnight. Okay? So you can drive across Illinois without stopping, which I did about 3 weeks ago, and never stayed overnight because I was on my way back from between Indiana and Iowa. I just went across. That's 0 days in their eyes. But if I had stayed overnight, which I did on the going end of that particular trip, I stayed at a national park campground in southern Illinois, in whatever that national park is they've got down there. I stayed overnight. That's 2 days, because there's 2 partial days, the day I arrived at the campground and the day that I left the campground and left the state. That's 2 days. Now, and I told the world on my website, I did that, and that means that I literally can't go stay overnight in Illinois for the rest of this calendar year, because if I do so, that'll be 2 more days, the day I arrive and the day I leave, and that'll trigger an obligation to register. So but I drove across and I never stopped. Well, I did. I went to Wild Bill Hickok's birthplace, but I was only there for like half an hour, looking at the monument and everything, and then I left. And I was out of state by the end of the day. So that's 0. Does that help? Okay, thank you.
so if someone, like a loved one of ours, was on a team and they had an event in the state, they could go that day, do the event, and then get out of there and go back, and it's 0 days.
And
hopefully.
if it's a state that says, as somebody was talking about, 7 days, there's a lot of states. There's a lot of states that allow you at least 7 days. There's a couple of states that allow you 30 days. Virginia, Pennsylvania, Oregon, I think, yes, Oregon. Yeah. Wisconsin, that's good to know. 30 days, and you know, so he could stay overnight. You know, if the team is staying overnight at some hotel because they're going to be playing a game tomorrow, and then blah, blah, blah. If it's in a state, so just check what the requirement is, all right?
Okay.
For that state.
Yeah, I think I've looked at your site, but I was just a little confused on that, you know, because if you just get there, like if you just had the event, got there, and then we just left, you know, does that?
Just left.
Because do you have to register? Because are some of the
No, you
states,
don't have to
some of the
register.
states you have to just register right when you get there,
There's a
no matter
number
what?
of days, for every state, there's a number of days. Check that number of days. It can't possibly be 1 day. So, you know, so if he goes in there, plays his game, and leaves, he's gonna be fine.
Okay, thanks.
There is, by the way, one state that's 24 hours. Rhode Island. However, Rhode Island is one of 4 states, count them, 4, Alaska, Nevada, Rhode Island, and surprisingly, South Dakota, that have these short windows, but also maintain a separate visitors registry. Right? Separate visitors registry. For Alaska, for example, you can get the form to get on their visitors registry online and turn it in online. Just tell them when, you know, fill out the form, and then you just go. You get 30 days, even though their law says that you have to go and register if you're coming to their state the next business day after you arrive. But you can stay, but you can get on the visitor's registry. And that means, what that means is, they know when you're going to be there, they know when you're gone. Now, if you think they're going to throw out that information after you leave, you're sadly mistaken. But you won't be on their public registry, and I think you'd be happy about that. Next.
Hi, me again. Something you said in response to the previous question got me to think, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, but with like unintended circumstances, like your vehicle breaks down or you fall off a mountain while you're hiking in a national park and you're stuck there longer than you intended to be. Does that still...
You mean stuck at the bottom of the cliff?
Stuck in the cliff, stuck in the hospital, but wherever you
Right.
are, does that activate the
All right.
the time?
That is always the issue now, isn't it? That is the concern. That is a legitimate problem. On this very trip from Iowa to here, I didn't want to stay overnight in Missouri. And the reason why I didn't want to stay overnight in Missouri is because Missouri has this rule. You're allowed to stay overnight in a park. And I have my car all set up with a, as like a bed in the back and everything, and that's how I camp. But you cannot stay in a park if there's a playground. All right? And guess what? I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything on purpose because I'm a city planner. I've done park planning, park design. Hey, I've got a great idea. Let's put a playground in every campground. Sounds great, doesn't it? Except for us. So I traveled over to Nebraska, just right over the state line, with the objective of finding a campground there. Because even though Nebraska only allows you 3 business days, and it will, the third day, including partial days, and a third day will trigger, I figure, well, I'll use those up now. But Nebraska, it's not 3 business days per aggregate per year. It's 3 days, 3 consecutive days. Okay, I'll stay overnight. I'll use up 2 days because that's 2 partial days, and then I will travel. I'll go to Texas. I'm coming back through Nebraska, but I can restart the clock because they don't have an aggregate rule. They just have a continuous day rule, which means that you can leave and then you can come back in the same calendar year and restart that clock. So I'll be fine, except for the fact while I was driving down interstate, I don't know what the hell interstate it was, I got a flat tire. Right? I had to call AAA, have them come out, replace my tire because I'm an old geezer and I can't do it myself. And then I was like, by the time it's like, oh my God, I can't go to a campground. So I had to stay at a hotel. Right? And I'm over there on the side of the highway, up at the top of the exit ramp, and I'm looking ahead of me and I'm seeing a Motel 6. Okay, that's going to be cheap. And I stayed overnight. Well, suppose I got in a traffic accident, right? This is what you're bringing up. And I had to stay in Nebraska for more than 3 consecutive business days, or 3 consecutive business days, partial days count, and the third day triggers, which is what the SOAR office there told me. Yeah, it would trigger an obligation to register in Nebraska. So that's a serious concern as you're traveling. You need to be mindful of that. And don't fall off a cliff, okay? Just be careful.
Regarding the travel registries you mentioned, like for Alaska.
Yeah, the visitor registries.
Yes, the visitor registries. Do those hinder your ability to get off your own home state registry? Like, are you on that registry long-term on the visitor registry?
No, those visitor registries, the interesting thing about first of all, being on another state's registry, and I'm on two, Florida and Iowa, they don't affect each other, right? So being on some other state's registry is not going to hinder your chances of getting off your own registry. It's not going to affect it one way or the other. The reason why, frankly, the reason why you don't want to be on the reason why you want to be on as few registries as possible is because you don't want to get pulled over by some sheriff's deputy in Idaho, have him take your driver's license and look you up and find out that you're a registered sex offender in 17 states. You know, it's not a good look. As to the 4 states that have these visitor registries, not a single one of those 4 states has the visitors registry enshrined in state law. Not one of them. All of these states are states where they have a short deadline. Like I said, Alaska is you got to go in and register the next business day. But all 4 of those states also have a system that says, a law that says, when you leave the state, we have to take you off the public registry anyway. So you go to that state, you find yourself, and I don't know whether Nebraska, by the way, is one of those states, but it might be. Most states have a system for getting you off when you leave, if you're a visitor, if you're truly a visitor, okay? Some of them are really convoluted, but most states do. 15 states will not. Florida's one, okay? But because these states that have a short deadline, and they're also required to take you off when you leave, the bureaucrats, hey, I'm a former lifetime career bureaucrat, all right? What they've done is they've come up with this separate system that is a matter of work avoidance, all right? As the lady in the South Dakota SOAR office told me, she said, because I was asking her about this, obviously I'm doing my research, I'm wanting to know what the rules are. She says, what's that bike rally, the Sturgis? She says, you know, well, she didn't talk like that because she's a woman. She said, you know, we have hundreds of sex offenders coming to our state every year for the Sturgis bike rally. And our state has a 3-day registration deadline. You know, if we had to, why would we want to force all those hundreds of sex offenders to register? The Sturgis bike rally apparently lasts more than 3 days, but less than a week. So all we're asking you to do, sir, is come in, check in at the sheriff's department, tell them you're here for the Sturgis bike rally or for whatever reason, tell them when you're going to leave, no harm, no foul. And guess what? What she didn't say is, you know, why would we want to go through all that work of having to put people on the registry and then have to take them off when they leave when we don't have to? And that is the reason. That's the reason why these states that have short deadlines tend to come up with workarounds, especially if they're a state that is where the bureaucrats are going to require to go back into the computer and fix it and take you off when you leave. Next, any other questions? Because we're down to, time's up. Thank you.